Hey everyone, my name's Kellen. I'm an alcoholic. Um, Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, Karen, for introducing me. Can everyone hear me okay through the headphones, stuff like that? Cool, awesome. I haven't actually had the pleasure of meeting Steven. Someone must have reached out to him and told him to give me a call or a ring, and I'm not sure if they said, hey, let's get this guy to speak, so it'll help some people, or if it's going to make everyone sicker, but we'll find out, right? Um, my sobriety date is May 22nd, 2019. That was the date of surrender, day of sobriety, whatever you want to call it, right? But it was also the end of a really long and exhausting road. And I think a lot of times, you know, when I would speak when I was younger, I would want you to know all these aspects about my childhood and this and that and how I grew up and when I first did this and that and how many siblings I had. But the one thing that I want everyone to know about my childhood is that it was wonderful. It was an amazing experience. I was loved. I had parents that cared about me. I was given opportunities. I was raised by two parents that did the best that they could. I had, sisters that I was raised with that were all over the place, but we always had everything that we needed. And thankfully, I wasn't exposed to too much darkness as a child. And I bring that up for accountability for myself because it's important for me to not try to attach my alcoholism to a specific point in time or this certain shift for me, right? For me, like when I drank, I liked the effect produced. You're right. The first time I drank was when I was 12 years old. I loved the way that it made me feel. Um, of course I was insecure. Of course I had issues as a child with self-esteem and those kind of things. And what I would go to find out in life is that's just modern, adolescence. That's how adolescence is. We're insecure, we're scared, right? A lot of things that we experience when we come in here. And so I think for me, I don't have this grand reason to be an alcoholic, right? And I'm grateful that I am today. I'm grateful that I know that I am, and I'm excited that I get to tell you a little bit about what this experience has meant for me, walking through the steps, walking through this stuff with a sponsor, getting to know a power greater than myself, translating that message to other men, carrying it forward. My life looks completely different than the way that it used to. When I got sober on May 22nd, 2019, I had been trying to get this thing for a while. I was first introduced to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous when I was 23 years old. And, I really was excited and interested. It was a genuine thing for me. I didn't really show up very resistant to this stuff. I had people that would actually like be interested in talking to me and didn't want anything from me and offered me coffee and food and cookies and stuff like that. And with some of my past, like I'm super appreciative of that because my lifestyle that I lived through alcoholism really drove me away from basic things like that we forget to enjoy and have gratitude for. And so, when I came in, I was 23. I definitely qualified to be here at age 23 is where I'll leave it. And I just, I couldn't grab a hold of this thing. And I think that was a couple reasons. And I think that, I could turn to all the things I didn't do the right way or the fourth step, I didn't write it this way. But at the end of the day, I just wasn't willing to go to any lengths. And that's as simple as it gets for me, right? I wasn't willing to go to whatever length that it took for me to get sober, for me to get to know God, for me to listen to a sponsor. You could have some of this from me, but you couldn't have all of it from me. And so, I danced through Alcoholics Anonymous for about 5 years, kind of coming in, doing it a little bit to Kellen's version of the 12 steps, dipping back out, coming in, going out to eat with you guys, but then not being sure about you. And when I was 28 years old, I showed up to pick up, I think my sixth or seventh white chip. I had clean time a couple times. And I really just want to iterate the fact that it was clean time, right? I don't really know if I ever was hooked up to power and really had some recovery going on. But I had some periods of abstinence, and things, were rebuilt during that time. So when I got sober, I was in this devastating place in life where I was like, oh my gosh, here we go again, right? Like I'm doing this all over again. And everyone's right. I'm never going to get it and this and that. And, the 12 steps won't work for me and this won't work and Alcoholics Anonymous won't work. And maybe I should try all these different variations of all these different versions of recovery so I can find the right thing that makes sense to me and fits my personality and kind of my goals. And what I really found out is I never allowed it to work for me. Right. Like that's what I think is really important. Like I just never allowed it to. And I love when I talk to guys today and they hit me with the whole like AA or the 12 steps doesn't work for me. And I challenge them on that. And I'm like, does it not work for you, or you're not allowing it to work for you? Because I've never met anyone that it doesn't work for. That's like genuinely my experience. If you truly give it your all, you truly invest yourself into the program. I haven't had a drink since I did that. And that's all I did different from the times before. I just truly invested, right? I truly bought in, and I truly listened, and I truly, got out of my own way a little bit. When I pulled up, to Alcoholics Anonymous in 2019, I was super wrecked, right? I had been terrorizing a family for years. I had never kept a job longer than maybe 6 months. No one trusted me, rightfully so. I had been hospitalized multiple times. I had been jailed multiple times. I've been to a bunch of rehabilitation centers. And I definitely earned my spot to be here and get some help. And when I got here, an old timer walked up to me and he said, "Hey, I heard you had some clean time before this, and hey, tell me what happened. Let's talk about that." And I was in the middle of the nowhere at this program that I was in, that I just enrolled in to get some help. And I told him, it's interesting, Roscoe. I stopped going to meetings, and I stopped doing this, and I stopped doing that. And I'll never forget, he said, "Man, you just thought that you had power." And he just walked off. And it was one of the most realistic, genuine things that had ever been told to me in the fellowship, right? Because I thought I didn't write my fourth step the right way. I thought I didn't make my amends fast enough. I thought I didn't go to enough meetings. And guys, my experience with recovery is I don't have to go to a meeting every day to stay connected to power, right? I'm not going to be a perfect member of recovery. I'm going to write inventory and be blind to some things. I'm going to have days that I don't enter God into my life. And so really what it came down to when I got sober is there was this really important concept of the first step that I just had never really sat with and thought about and really processed with the sponsor. And I do want to be able to say that, like, competent sponsorship, more than competent, good sponsorship in my life has been extremely valuable to me as a man, and has taught me a lot about life. And when I started working with the sponsor, he said, "Hey, Kellen, I want to show you what this book is about." And I'm like, "Okay." So we just kind of start on page 1 and all this stuff. And he said, "I want to show you what the table of contents really means." And so, I open the table of contents and I see these different chapter numbers and this and that. And I think in my mind, because I've been hanging out in AA for a while at the time, that I know what the chapters are about. I know what it's going to be about. I know everything, right? I know what to do. And he broke it down for me, and I want to just kind of talk about it a little bit before we go into the book. And he said, "Hey, I want you to write, down some brackets of what each bracket means and which chapter means." And he said, "Hey, I want you to write down general info about AA, and I want you to bracket it from the preface all the way to the forward to the 4th edition." And he said, "I want you to take the first step, and I want you to bracket it from the doctor's opinion to page 44. The second step is going to be page 44. How it works is going to be steps 3 and 4. Into action, it's going to be steps 5 through 11. And step 12 is not just chapter 7, working with others. It's actually the rest of the chapters in the book, from working with others to a vision for you." And guys, I had never known that. I had never had anyone that had taken the time to go, "Hey, let me really explain what this is about." And it absolutely was kind of the beginning of a new experience. Another guy, when I got sober, before I started all this step work stuff, he walked up to me and said, "Hey, I heard you had some clean time before." Same kind of thing. I said, "Yeah, I did. My ego's feeling big. I did used to be high and mighty, right? With like my year of sobriety or whatever it was before." And he said, "Man, you would be best to forget that you ever had that clean time and have a new experience, right? Or it's going to be the thing that kills you." And I've watched it kill so many people in my life close to me, right? It's extremely hard to get sober, go back out, come back in, have this new experience, have this new willingness, this new relationship to power, to the 12 steps. And that was one of the greatest pieces of advice anyone ever gave me, right? They said, "Hey, have a new experience, allow yourself to let go of the past. I'm sure great things happened during that time. Have a new experience with this process of recovery." And so we got into the first step, guys, in the doctor's opinion. And what I came to find out was the first step has a couple different aspects of it, right? But the ones he really wanted me to see was that, about halfway through those 44 pages, it splits down between the physical allergy and then the mental obsession. And the physical allergy I could get behind pretty well, guys, right? Like when I put in, right, I lose control and this and that, and I'm all over the place and I can't stop. And right, I understand about that with me, and that's my relationship to alcohol. What I never understood was this aspect called the mental obsession. And I thought the mental obsession was like, I think about drinking, so then I drink again, and I think about it, and I think. And what I came to find out is the mental obsession is this mental obsession that I can beat the game. It's going to look different if I just do it like this, if I just do it like that, if I just switch my alcohol or switch my environment, the girl that I'm dating or whatever it is, if I just switch all these things, that's going to somehow bring me, this experience with drinking like a normal man. And my sponsor and me kind of did this work and these exercises around kind of what was really my plan with all this stuff and what was the result. Kellen, I want you to tell me about every time you had a little bit of clean time, what your plan was before you ever picked up. What was your plan? What was the master plan? You're just going to drink on a Friday, right? And then you weren't going to end up being gone from work for 2 weeks and in a motel room and all the sketchy stuff that I would do. It would just be like, yeah, I'm just going to drink on a Friday. And I would never just drink on the Friday, right? And it's that simple for me today, thankfully. I can look at it that way. The results of my relationship to drinking never was what the plan was, ever, not a single time. And so when that really started to stick with me, guys, it actually gave me a fighting chance, right? And I remember, I would be in Alcoholics Anonymous and people would be like, I'm on the 4th step and I'm on this step. And I'd be on the 1st step, right? Because the 1st step's 44 pages of the book. It's like 25%, 26% of the book that we read out of when we do meetings and all these things. And so my sponsor really took me through line by line and really took the time to explain it to me. And here's the cool thing. He didn't tell me what my experience had to be. He didn't tell me, this is you or any of that stuff. He asked me, is this you? Right? He left it up to me because the only person that has to understand that I need to be here, that I need to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, the only person that I need to understand is me, right? I need to know that, because if I don't know that, how can I ever trust anything that you're saying? Because I'm just going to come in and go, well, we're different in age and we're different with this and how we got loaded was different. And I'm going to look at the differences. And when I realized, oh, wow, we all have this same common bond that our plan is never our result, all of a sudden I kind of understood the 1st step. Yes, when I drink, I lose control. I end up in places, and I break out in handcuffs and all those things, but that was never the plan, right? And that's the thing that really started to make a difference in my recovery. And when I got to see that, I got to see my life was insane, right? And I love We Agnostics in the big book. I think it is the most elegantly written chapter of all the text in the 164, hands down. It explains it in such a way to where it makes it less scary for someone like me. And it talks about the bedevilment, and it talks about, essentially almost like this mini 4th step experience where it's like my relationships are falling apart. I'm full of fear. I'm full of misery, all these things. And it shows that, hey, Kellen, now that you're 44 pages into this book and you've been clean for a little bit, you're kind of waking up and you don't feel so good anymore, right? Like I hear the expression pink cloud. Like I kind of call it the 1st step cloud, because in the 1st step, I'm getting engaged. I'm getting excited about this work and this book and all these things. And I get to the 2nd step and, I'm starting to realize like, man, I'm kind of a miserable, sorry son of a gun, right? I kind of have a discontentment towards life. And I start to see that my lifestyle previously and my lifestyle, just walking into this thing, it's a little bit insane, right? And insanity, it talks about it, I know we hear the definition of like doing the same thing over, expecting different results. The big book defines it as this lack of balance, this lack of proportion, right? When we have all this evidence to have proportion, to find balance and all these things, we don't. And my life was very unbalanced for many years. And so, for me, it wasn't difficult for me to get behind this concept, guys, of a power higher, bigger than myself, higher than myself, whatever you want to call it. And it's the way that We Agnostics explains it, right? It talks about that deep down, in every man, woman, and child is this fundamental idea of God. And so my sponsor really was able to kind of go, hey, deep down inside of even someone like you, right? This kind of falling apart alcoholic, in and out of programs, all this stuff, even deep down inside of you, there's this great reality of something bigger than you, right? And boy, was he right, right? It's my experience today. I look back and I'm like, man, thank God someone took the time to go, hey, I believe in you and I think you have something down in you that can be connected. And my life was just insane, guys. I mean, I couldn't help to believe that I kept living for a reason, right? And I kept finding myself back in these rooms with you guys. And I was like, man, like, I'm not leading myself back, right? It's not up to me. I was not looking for, this fellowship, these people. right? I just wanted to get out of some consequences, and I wanted to kind of stop causing everyone pain, but I wasn't necessarily looking for all this, right? If you would have been with me, 5.5, 6 years ago and asked anyone, you think that guy's going to eventually be of service and speak? They would have been like, that guy, no. We'll see if he makes it to next week. So, there was something about that second step experience where it just wasn't difficult for me to believe. And I think for some people it is, and I think it's because they don't allow for themselves to make it a little bit easier on themselves and really listen to what it's saying. It's not asking you to have this perfect relationship with a higher power, to do all these things, or to be a part of a certain religion or any of those things. It's saying, hey, can you be open to the idea that you're not the biggest guy in the room, right? And I love when I work with sponsees, because some of them we can get into the word God, we can get into this thing called God, but some of them it's really scary. It's extremely scary to talk about the idea of God, right? Or whether it's their past or their experience or their preconceived notion, right? Because I'm also someone that I can decide how a whole fellowship of people looks just off of one or two ugly people, right? I'm extremely good at it. I'm extremely good at practicing judgment. And I would just like when I was younger, I'd go into meetings and I'd go, yeah, there was one or two people there that weren't very nice to me. So the whole meeting, and then after that, the whole fellowship, Alcoholics Anonymous, isn't right for me, right? And I'll just self-sabotage out of my relationship with not only having a relationship with y'all, but having a relationship with God, right? So the second step for me is just kind of like, hey, maybe you're not the biggest person in the room. Maybe you can get some help. We've tapped into this thing, and I had a sponsor that he looked like he was tapped into it. Man, he looked happy. He looked free, right? He looked like he was attracted to something. And he wasn't a guy that had 30 years sober, guys. He was a guy that had 6 months sober, right? The guy that carried the message to me, he had it going on, right? The power of the steps and how this thing works in my life today is there's no amount of clean time that really proves where I'm at with my relationship with God or my relationship with the steps, right? Like clean time doesn't do that for me. It's showing up and doing the work. And I was working with the guy that showed up and did the work, and to this day he shows up and does the work. And that's why he continues to be attractive to me, right? It's why it's someone I listen to, and I take his perspective and I ask him for help. We get to the third step in this book, and it goes, okay, let us drop the hammer on you a little bit, Kellen. It's not so much that, alcohol is your problem, right? And all this stuff, and that you just keep going to jail. You're actually really just kind of the self-centered, scared guy, right? And you think about yourself a lot, and everything that ever happens to you, you wonder, how is it affecting me? And me. And you don't really ever stop to think about anyone else. And you can get so wrapped up in self-delusion and dishonesty and all these things that really your problem in life is the way that your perspective on life, the way that you walk through life, the way that you view life. Right. And what I found out, guys, through the process of this program is I don't have the ability to just change my perspective. Right. That's kind of the whole thing behind this relationship with God. Hey, I don't have the power, but God does. And so, I would do these things where I'd be like, yeah, I'm just going to change the way I am. I'm just going to be nicer. I'm just going to do this. And it's like, man, if that worked for me, I probably wouldn't have ever ended up here. Right. This disposition to kind of just be discontented in life. I showed up to the third step and I was like, oh, wow, they're not lying about me. This is kind of painful news, though. I thought we just get to blame everything about alcohol the whole time. And what I love about the big book is it stops talking about alcohol entirely right around the second and third step. Right after the first step, I don't even know if it mentions it again other than the fourth step a little bit. So really what I get to find out is that I have this living problem, right? That I have this spiritual malady, that I can find anything wrong in a room full of loving people, that I could have everything I ever wanted and I can still find something to complain about, that I know how to be in a spot where nothing just quite fits right, and I'm just in this position of being ungrateful. And I know how to do that to this day, right? I still have the ability to do that. I'm here to tell you, if anyone's newer to the fellowship or the rooms, we are not perfect people. We are people figuring it out. Right. The good news is I have kind of this spiritual toolkit and access to this power and to these people in these rooms that really help me see that delusion. And so, my favorite thing about the third step is it really puts on this proposition towards you where it says, hey, we want you to do a couple things, right? We want you to stop playing God, stop trying to control life. And then it goes on to tell us in the third step promises that all sorts of remarkable things happen. Right. We have a new employer, being all powerful. He provided what he needed, what we needed if, there's a big if there, we kept close to him and perform his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, little plans and designs, more and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life as we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence. We began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter, and we were reborn. And that's the biggest part that sticks out to me, guys, is that last part, that fear of today or tomorrow. And I remember sitting in a place where multiple times in my life, right, where I've been in a place where, man, I don't know what's going to happen next, and I'm totally okay with it, right? I can't tell you that sitting where I'm at today on September 10th, 2024, that that's exactly where I am. I have plenty of fear and insecurity and stuff that crops up, but I've had these pockets in my life where I wasn't worried about what happened tomorrow, even when I had every reason to worry, right? Because of this relationship and this trust in God. It talks about in steps 2 and 3, it really gets into this idea that maybe God is either everything or he is nothing, right? And so it's like, what is my choice to be? And so it doesn't say, hey, God can be some things, but he doesn't have to be everything. The book says, it's, God is everything or he is nothing. And that statement means even when things are going bad, God is everything, right? Not just when things are going good. And so for me, it's like, hey, what's my choice to be? Which way am I going to look at it? And it felt more attractive to me to look at it that maybe God's everything, right? Like I was tired of being a pessimist and a miserable alcoholic. When I got to the 4th step, there's a couple things in the 4th step where it talks about, grave, kills, right? All these kind of action words around death. And it's one of the only times in the book that it really starts to go, hey, this will kill you, and this is infinitely grave, and these kind of things. And it hints to it, I think, 4 times over the course of one of the paragraphs, and in the 4th step literature. And I believe in that, right? I believe that some people have the ability to walk out being angry at the world. And I think for people like me that are alcoholics, I just don't have the luxury to do that, because when I do, I completely lose my mind. And it doesn't always end up with me drinking, right? But it ends up with someone getting hurt in the process, right? With just me being a resentful, crazy person. When I got to the 4th step, me and my sponsor, he challenged me to write my 4th step the way that he did. It was a deeper experience with the steps, right? It was like a million questions behind each resentment, all this stuff. And I love it, because when I give it to other guys and they're super overwhelmed, I love to be like, I did that, so you have to do that, right? AA stays the same. And so, we would go into these questions and, how did it affect me? What was my mistake in the matter, right? Where was kind of my false belief system around this stuff? And whenever I did my 5th step with my sponsor, he did this cool thing where he took a sheet of paper and he drew a line down the center of it. And one side he wrote false belief systems, and the other side he wrote potential amends. And, the false belief systems were basically the lies that kind of supported my resentment, right? And supported my harms to others. And when I got done, spilling my guts to this guy multiple times, we've written inventory multiple times together. There's this sheet that he hands me, and it says, hey, these are Kellen's false belief systems. And it'll say stuff like, Kellen has to be right to be okay. Kellen has to be accepted to be okay. Kellen's a this, Kellen's a that. And it's all these things that kind of sound ugly and harsh, right? You look at it and you're like, ugh, right? And it's even more humbling, guys, when you're doing it with a little bit of clean time put together. When you're writing a 4th step, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years sober, and you start to see that, oh, wow, like I've got these false belief systems even when I'm sober, right? Because when I first got sober, I'm like, I could accept a lot of these, right? I burned a lot of people, did a lot of sketchy stuff, right? And I could accept these, these character defects with them. Like, hey, that checks out. I kind of did do that to that guy, and I do those kind of things. And, but I'll tell you guys, when I looked at it, it was harsh stuff. It was stuff that I didn't like. It made me feel gross. It made me feel right with this new way of living that I was adopting and learning about, and being the student to this teacher, right? And the student to this other teacher I was starting to get to know in the background called God. It was really scary to kind of hear how ugly of a person that I could be, and how delusional that I could be in my thinking, even while sober and stuff like that. And he wrote down this stuff, and he wrote down potential amends. And at the bottom of the false belief systems, he wrote, none of these things are real, right? So none of these false belief systems that I have about others and all this stuff, none of those are based in reality. And then what he wrote on the other side with the potential amends is he wrote, think of anyone else that was affected with each amend, like with each person I've written down. right? So I didn't get the easy way out. He was like, oh yeah, it's going to be a spider web. You're going to find out all these other people that you've affected as a result of hurting this other guy. And so, my amends list like quadrupled, right, from the list that he wrote down. But he told me to go. He followed the direction out of the big book. Go home. Essentially, I didn't have a home, right? I went to a grass field at the treatment program I was in. It was a long-term facility, and I took a camping chair and I sat there for an hour, right? And I read that list and I read about those people I had harmed and I read about those false belief systems. And it was one of the first times in my life that I heard a lot of things about myself that were unfavorable, and I didn't run from them, right? Because my whole life, anytime I heard anything negative about me, I'd run from it. It wouldn't be my fault. There's another way out. Well, it's not really my responsibility. And I didn't run this time, And so I read this stuff and I didn't like the way that it made me feel. And so he said, hey, if you don't like the way that it makes you feel and you really think that you can't fix it on your own, right? It's time to talk to God about it, which is step 6 and 7. And I have this interesting experience with 6 and 7, right? Where, multiple times in my recovery, that's why it's important for me to tell you, where I'll have something pop up that makes me look like a jerk, right? And I'll be convinced that, you know what? I'm not going to do it again. I'm not going to do it again. I'm not going to do it again. And this great example is when I was probably about a year sober, I called a guy that was in my network and I told him, hey, I was called a word today and I got really defensive and I do what boys do. And I kind of, was getting kind of scrappy and wanted to, get violent and all these things, right? All these things that show fear and insecurity. And I said, yeah, it really hurt my feelings. And he said, well, what do you think you need to do? And I said, I just need to be less sensitive. And he said, okay. And he said, so what's your plan? He said, I'm just going to be more aware of being less sensitive. And he laughed. And I said, why are you laughing? He said, man, it's just so funny that you think that you have the ability to just be less sensitive when you want to be, right? Because if you had the ability to be less sensitive, Kellen, we probably wouldn't be on this call and you probably wouldn't have threatened to fight your boss. He was my boss, by the way, and I threatened to fight him, right? So my network was like, hey, you're crazy and you can't fix yourself. And I've had this happen over and over and over and over again in my experience with recovery. And this is another reason that I continue to like show up and work steps and sponsor guys, because it's like, guys, I got to continue working on myself. Because the minute that I think that I got it and I don't need any kind of help, I get to a place so crazy in my mind that I almost wish I was drinking, right? Because I can throw myself pretty far out there. And 6 and 7 for me, like it really separated the kind of boys from the men for me, essentially, right? Like it really helped me step into manhood in the process of recovery, because I got to see like, hey, even when you're sober and you're at your best and people are trusting you again and all these things, you can't just fix you by yourself, right? You got to get some outside help, outside of, a sponsor, outside of these rooms in this meeting, right? This is why I can't survive off just meetings and a sponsor. I can't survive without this power, right, that we can get connected to. And so during that 5th step, this guy made my 8th step, if you will. I never got on the 8th step. I had the 8th step handed to me essentially, and I had to expand across this list. And so, like I said before, he said, hey, write down these other names of the people that could be affected. And right, my amends list quadrupled. And God bless, sponsors, right? They do these cool things like, let's do the ones that you're willing to do now, but not willing to do later and all this stuff. And, my sponsor let me know, hey, we can cookie cutter it however you want, man, but we're going to make amends, right? We're going to get right. And if you got someone you pull up on that you owe money to, and they say, hey, we don't mind, Kellen. We're just so glad that you're sober. Don't worry about the money. He said, hey, you find a way to hand them that money or go turn it into a charity or whatever you're going to do, because it's not your money. Right. And that is, guys, going back again to my relationship with sponsorship and having a sponsor that took the time to, feed me this stuff and really, really explain it to me, absolutely changed my life. Right. Because my amends list, thank God they're longer. I'm still working on them. I still have things to be working on. It gives me something to do when I think that I don't need help or whatever it is, or I'll be sponsoring a guy and they'll be like, oh, I'm making this amends today. And who keeps me invested in amends is my sponsees, right? Like the most beautiful thing ever is when you're talking to a sponsee and they're telling you all this stuff that you're doing or they're doing. And you're just sitting there thinking, oh, I've been sponsoring this guy for 3 years now. And he's talking about amends he's still chasing after at 3 years sober, right? And I'm 5 years sober and I haven't made amends in a few months, right? I don't even know where my list is at. I better dig that up, right? And so sponsorship is such a vital experience for me, for my recovery. You know, when I made amends, there were a couple powerful amends that I made, for me. And of course, like the financial ones are great. And we look at those when we get sober, and me, I'm like, those are the scariest ones. Those are the most serious ones, the thousands of dollars. And I'll tell you guys, the most humbling ones was sitting across from people that I had emotionally tormented, right? The people that I had really caused true significant trauma to. I had to make an amends where I had to, in my sponsor, the three questions, right? This is what I did. Can you tell me if there's anything I left out? Can you tell me what I can do to make it right? Can you tell me how it made you feel? Those kind of questions, right? And my response after they tell me how it made them feel, I'm only allowed to say thank you. And I repeat that process with my sponsees. I say, hey, when you tell them, when they tell you what you did, and they tell you how it made you feel, you're not allowed to be like, well, you want to know what, man, that's because the way we communicated that day and this and that. It's just, no, thank you. Thank you for telling me that that's how it made you feel. Thanks for being honest with me. And doing it like that, guys, has been such a humbling experience for me. And I did this one with my wife and the mother of my child, where when I came home and made amends to her, and I was on that process and the steps, it was the first time that I gave her permission to be upset with me. Right. And this is someone that's a member of Alcoholics Anonymous that just celebrated 10 years. That's the mother of my child and is a wonderful person. And this is someone I drug through the mud. Right. And I absolutely tormented her life, scared her all the time, didn't know when I was coming home, didn't know when dad was going to actually raise his kid, those kind of things. And sitting across from a woman and saying, hey, I know, right, that I've done these things. Can you tell me what else I've done? And can you tell me how it's made you feel, essentially babysitting me the last 5 years, right, that I've been going in and out of the rooms and holding it down when I don't show up and stuff like that. Can you tell me how that makes you feel? It was one of the most humbling experiences that I could ever describe, right? I couldn't describe it if I wanted to. And I remember it was the first time in my life that I gave someone permission to be upset with me, that I didn't try to fix it, that I didn't try to just find this instant solution or play God or decide how they feel or any of those things. I really just let them be where they were at with it, right? And that's something that's greater than me, guys, because that's not what I do. I don't give you permission to feel a certain way and all that stuff. Like, that's not what I do. I decide how you feel, and I decide the timeline of how soon you should get over it, right? And I decide it's not a big deal or not. You don't get to decide. And that's how I always lived my life. And I started doing that with other people, and I started to wake up a little bit more and more. And for some people, their thing is, hey, when I wrote inventory, that's when everything really skyrocketed to me. When I said the third step prayer, when I did this and that, for me, it's when I started making amends. When I got to see tangible evidence of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous in my life and what it had done for me, both, spiritually, physically, mentally, it was when I sat across from other people and I made amends to them. It's when I went and corrected action. To this day, when I make amends, because I have to make amends in real time. Like when you start making amends, you go on to this thing called the 10th step. And I went on to the 10th step, and as things would pop up, I would watch for when these things cropped up, because I can see a little bit more today. I can't lie to myself as easily. I can still see them, right? Now I can kind of see when I'm being a jerk. It's kind of crazy. I didn't think it would ever be possible, but I can see it a little bit. And so, 10th step talks about watch when these things crop up, ask God at once to remove them, right? Discuss them with another alcoholic, and then turn to see who you can help or be of service to. And that's worked for me. Every time I'm having a bad day, every time anything's going wrong, that's something that's always been a part of my daily function. And I remember one time I had this really bad day in early recovery and everything was falling apart. And I went home and I started violently cleaning my house. And my wife walked out and she was like, yo, why are you cleaning the house and taking out the trash? It's like 11 o'clock at night. Like, are you on drugs kind of thing, right? And I just remember just kind of telling her, hey, I just want to kind of clean this and that. But I was basically just trying to turn my attention to be helpful wherever I could, so that, hopefully the trash being taken out or whatever it was would just get all of this out of my head. And that was it in early recovery. And where it shows up today is sponsees, right? I'll be having this terrible day, and a guy that I'm sponsoring will be calling, and I'll be like, dang it, right? Because that's how I am. I'm like, oh, these guys, they're calling, they want stuff, right? And then I answer, and it just takes away all my stuff, and I get to realize I have such first world problems today. The 11th step for me, it talks about prayer and meditation. One of my favorite things that a buddy ever said to me is that, prayer is the aspect or is the process of asking God for help, and meditation is listening to God's answers. One of the things for me is like, I do want to be the first to tell you, I'm not a guy that lights incense and all this stuff and sits with my legs crossed, and like my sponsor is like, I'm not trying to sneak this the guy, but he's a guy that, he does it kind of a little bit more of the peaceful way. I'm someone that I just try to take time every day to be quiet and listen, not play on my phone, not talk to anyone, and just listen, right? That's all I need to do. Listen and see if I'm directed. And I always try to explain that to guys that I work with, like, hey, there's no such thing as this is how you meditate in my experience. How you meditate is you stop and you listen and you stop being distracted for a minute to the best of your ability. And you focus on your breathing, or you focus on a better future that you want for yourself, or whatever it is, but that's all you have to do. The 12th step has been literally the bright spot of my life, right? Sponsorship. I mean, I'm sure you guys can tell how much my sponsor means to me, and what he's done for me, and being able to do that with other men. And I love when guys, call me and they're like, you're saving my life. And I'm like, I promise you, I'm not saving your life, right? I'm showing you something that was shown to me. I've got all my sessions I ever did with my sponsor written down in a notebook. I know what session 1 looks like. I know what session 2 looks like. My book is highlighted a certain way. The guys that I sponsor, they have the same highlighter marks. They have the same pen marks. Nothing's changed from when I went through the steps. And so I have to explain that to them, like, hey man, I'm just showing you how to really sponsor other guys. Right? I'm getting you hooked up to power, and I'm just showing you how we sponsor guys, because they go, Kellen, why do we have to write down this stuff? And why do we have to highlight stuff? And we just read it and it feels disingenuous. And I said, well, you think we're highlighting this for you? We're not highlighting this for you. We're not writing this stuff down for you. We're writing this down so when you're sponsoring a guy down the road and you're on this page and you notice that we have something written here, right? The question, am I, next to a bunch of stuff in the first step. Am I this? Am I convinced? Right? Am I this? Am I that? We do that for a reason. So you're remembering when you're working with the guy that he needs to write that stuff down, because he's going to sponsor guys one time, right? And so I love sponsorship. I love what it's done for me. I've gotten the chance to get really close with some guys, and where sponsorship took a different toll for me, and where my sponsorship experience really became attractive, is when my sponsor started to let me know when he was struggling. Right? I can't be sponsored by a guy that's always on the beam, y'all, that never fails, that's always in a good place. I got to know that this guy that I'm putting some trust into and some faith into, I've got to know, man, that he has bad days. I got to know that he struggles, man. I got to know that he's human, because all you guys to me when I walked in were God. I didn't think that y'all could relate to me. I didn't think there was anything, right, that you could come down and help me with. And so when I started to feel a shift in my relationship with my sponsor is when he started to go, hey, I've had a bad day. Hey, this is what's going on. And where that really started to happen is that it wasn't because he was all of a sudden willing. I just started to ask, right? And the steps did this beautiful thing for me, y'all, where it made me kind of develop this conscious of thinking of others. And so I'd be on the phone with my sponsor and I'd go, how's your day going? How's things going at home? Where are you at with your relationship? How's your job going? What's going on? Right? And he would be honest with me, good or bad, no matter what. And I do that with my guys. And I just had a guy, right, I've been working with for months. He's getting ready to do his 5th step. It's the first time ever the other day. He said, yeah, how's everything going with you? I pay attention to it now, right? How long will it take before they ask me how I'm doing, right? And it's really cool, because I'll tell you, it's right around the time they're writing inventory every time. But sponsorship means so much to me. What my life looks like today as a result of the steps is nothing that I ever thought it was going to be. I've got a home. I've got a career. People trust me every single day. My family calls me if they need stuff. I'm invited to social functions. People aren't afraid when I leave home. I have a relationship with my child. When my son was born is when I went off the treatment. He was born and I just said, hey, you know what? I'm going to get in the car this time. I'm not going to fight it anymore. And he had just been born. And when I got home from treatment, my son didn't know I was his father. He was about 7 months old, or I'm sorry, he's about a year old. I had just missed his first birthday. I missed a major developmental, time of his life. And he thought that my dad was his dad, right? My son knows who I am today. We spend time together every day. We were just playing with wrestling action figures before I drove over to my office to hang out with you guys. I get him dressed every day. I get to ask him how school is, right? I get to be a part of his life. That is such a gift in itself. I get to show up for you guys. I get to be trusted, to be asked to be of service. And people aren't afraid of me anymore. And I think that that's the most beautiful thing for me today is that I can be helpful to someone If there's anyone in this meeting that wants to ever talk or connect, I'll drop my information. Reach out to me. I'm in the Southeast. I'm in Atlanta, and that's what I like doing. I like talking to other members of Alcoholics Anonymous and seeing if we can walk through this thing together. And with that, I appreciate you letting me share. Thank you.